I am delighted to welcome you to the third of our speaker series on pay equity this spring. We have been really excited to be hosting all of these. And if you missed our first two sessions, the first one was on paycheck fairness and equity audits. Our second one was on the sub-minimum wage, and these are all available on YouTube or through our IWL webpage. And we invite you to go ahead and take a look at those as well. My name is Andrea Schneider. I'm a professor of law at Marquette University and the inaugural director of the Institute for Women's Leadership. The Institute was founded in 2019 with a generous endowment from the Ross Family Foundation under the leadership of Marquette's Vice President for Research and Innovation, Jean Hasselhoff. And we are very grateful for both the family and Professor Hasselhoff's, Dr. Hasselhoff's great foresight in working this through and creating this wonderful institute. IWL was created with a vision of equity and inclusion across gender and other intersecting social identities. Our goals are to advance women's leadership locally and globally through pioneering research, innovative programming, and collaborative engagement. This speaker series is a perfect example of how all of that can be linked together. Based on research and in collaboration with partners throughout the city, we hope to provide programming that will make a difference. I'd like to thank our steering committee, who represents a variety of women's organizations in Milwaukee, that is helping us build this community together. I am particularly grateful to the Women's Leadership Collaborative, Tempo Professional Dimensions, and Milwaukee Women, Inc., with whom I look forward to working for many years as we strive to make Milwaukee a destination city for all women. And in addition to our wonderful steering committee and the WLC, these events would not be possible without our fantastically talented IWL team, but I'd also like to recognize and thank. So with that, let's take a look at how our poll questions turned out. And as they have outlined, of course, we're focused on paid family and medical leave and what we can do about that. So first of all, looking at when I served as caregiver, and so many of us have not yet had to care for a family member to that extent, and then others all along looking at whether we were paid, unpaid, or not. Paid family and medical leave. I love this with a ringing endorsement of that it is a necessity for all, was 93%. So that is terrific. And our last one, paid family leave. Shockingly, none of you chose that this means that you get to leave when your family acts up. I, for one, think that that would be a wonderful thing sometimes. But of course, tongue in cheek, everybody knew that this really means that one can stay at home and keep the job. It results in higher retention of women, and it means that the pay gap is lessened. So all of the above. And thank you for that and thinking about that as well. As we think about paid family leave, paid family and medical leave, it's clear that this is the time, right? As we are coming out of this pandemic, coming out of this global crisis, that now is the time to focus on changing the dynamic for women in the workplace. It's been a year of crisis. And as Winston Churchill said, we should never waste a good crisis. Our first speaker series in February discussed how progressive companies, like our own Land's End here in Wisconsin, had banned asking about salary history at hiring and instituted pay transparency for many of its jobs. And just this past week, the House of Representatives passed the Paycheck Fairness Act, which would mandate this behavior and these policies across the country. The issue of paid family and medical leave is just as important to pay equity. When parents are able to take leave, it improves health outcomes for children, keeps families above the poverty line, and increases worker productivity over time. Women being pushed out of the workforce in order to take care of themselves or others is a primary reason for the persistent wage gap between men and women. Years ago, when I was negotiating my own maternity leave, I negotiated a one-course reduction, which I made up by teaching overload the semester beforehand. And I thought this was a great deal. It never occurred to me at the time that there was something wrong with being back in a classroom literally 3 weeks after I gave birth. That was just the way that it was. My students are amazed that that in fact occurred in this century. They think the battle is over. For many of us, we know better. Only 20% of private sector workers, even last year, had access to paid family and medical leave. And the last year has shown just how crucial this policy is. We are delighted that our own local Northwestern Mutual, from whom we are hearing today, is one of those companies, among other local companies, providing this important benefit. And we hope that the private and public sector can work together to figure out how every worker, female and male, can access the paid family and medical leave that they need. I welcome you all to join IWL, WLC, and others in the way forward. After these speakers, we will ask for those who are interested to join with us as we brainstorm and take action. Our speakers today are wonderful examples of this way forward. As some of you know, our original speaker for today, Erika Moritsugu, has excitingly just been named to the White House as Deputy Assistant to the President and Asian American and Pacific Islander Senior Liaison. We are thrilled for her. And graciously stepping in for today's event is her colleague, Dr. Jessica Mason, who now brings the added benefit of having gone to school right around the corner here and knowing our state very well. I'll introduce Jessica and then turn to Janice Lucas-Taylor later in our program. And we will have time after each speaker for questions, so please put these in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Jessica Mason is the Senior Policy Analyst and Engagement Manager for Workplace Programs at the National Partnership for Women and Families, where she oversees in-house research and data analysis, tracks developments in academic and other research, and develops advocacy resources related to this agenda. Prior to her work at the National Partnership, Jessica was an instructor at the Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a researcher on economic justice, and she received her PhD from Madison. So as a Midwesterner, we are delighted to welcome her back. As she notes, Jessica loves to come back, marveling at the house prices, and of course, get our great cheese. So with that, Jessica, delighted to turn this over to you, and thank you again for stepping in and doing such a fabulous job, as I know you will, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you so much for that kind introduction and for the invitation to speak and fill in for my former boss, Erika Moritsugu. I know the previous speakers in the series have been just amazing leading lights in this fight for pay equity, and so it's really an honor to follow them. Yeah, so today I'll be talking about how paid family and medical leave can help us build an equitable economy. Next slide. So at the National Partnership for Women and Families, I have to pause for a moment because this year we are marking our 50th anniversary. We're a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization based in Washington, DC, and we particularly focus on improving the lives of women and families by achieving equality for all women. That means focusing on advancing gender and racial equity in the workplace through paid family and medical leave, equal pay, preventing sexual harassment, achieving fairness for pregnant workers, paid sick days for all workers, and fair scheduling. We also work on improving access to affordable quality healthcare, particularly addressing disparities and declining outcomes in maternal health, and also promoting comprehensive reproductive healthcare. Our work includes advocacy in public and private sectors at the federal, state, and local levels, including in Wisconsin. Our strategies include policy research and analysis, which is where a lot of my focus is, as well as technical assistance to policymakers, media, and other advocacy allies, participating in diverse coalitions and stakeholder relationships, and public engagement and public education. Next slide. So as I'm sure you have addressed already in this series, this topic starts with the wage gap. So the figure we often start with is that overall, women who are working full-time year-round are paid just 82 cents for every dollar paid to a man. And this gap is even wider for women of color. Black women are typically paid 63 cents, Native American women 60 cents, Latinas just 55 cents, and Asian American and Pacific Islander women are paid as little as 52 cents, as Burmese women are, and just 85 cents overall, compared to white non-Hispanic men. Now, those are some numbers to start with. I can give you one more that I find quite distressing, but relevant to today's topic. If you zoom out to a 10-year period, comparing men and women, women are paid only about 50 cents on the dollar if you start to account for the time that they spend out of the workforce. All of these numbers are more than just facts. They represent the tangible material consequences of sexism and white supremacy in the United States, and how our country and our economy over time has really systematically devalued women, particularly women of color, and women's labor. This pervasive wage gap is driven in part by gender and racial discrimination, workplace harassment, job segregation, and a lack of workplace families that support family caregiving. And you can see a little bit of a chart there spelling out sort of what share of that 18-cent overall gap is due to different causes. But as you're looking at that, I want to stop you in your tracks and say that's also a little bit of a trick graphic, because all of those factors are themselves interrelated. So if you think about something like discrimination and harassment, you can sort of piece that out as its own factor, except that discrimination and harassment also affect who enters which industries and which occupations and who stays in them long term. Women are often pushed out of particular jobs due to harassment, and that hurts their earnings over time. Gender and racial discrimination are deeply intertwined, and it's often impossible to tell whether it was race or gender in a particular case that was the source of the harassment. And we also see how gender norms and around caregiving affect the time people spend in the workforce and shape job pathways. We have all of these leaky pipelines that we often talk about in different career paths. And so as you think about those different factors, we're also going to think about how they're interrelated. Next slide. So intersecting causes really need interacting solutions. And so here is a little bit of a visual representation of how we at the National Partnership see all of these different policy areas as connected to the broader cause of economic security and health inequality for women and for all people. We know that women and families need this comprehensive set of policies to succeed. We know that there is a really deep relationship between health, caregiving, and economic security. When people don't have care, they can't go to work, as we've seen this last year. When people don't have access to healthcare, they may not be able to work. And we know that workplaces themselves and the conditions in work can affect things like health and people's ability to have families. So we know that we need to address all of these things for women to have economic security and to close the pay gap. One major change that we believe can help make a difference by hitting all of these areas at once is paid family and medical leave. Next slide. Unfortunately, our public policies have yet to really reflect the truth that health and caregiving and work are all interrelated. So looking at the civilian workers, this is public and private sector, just 21% of workers have paid family leave through their employer. Only 40% have personal medical leave for their own serious health conditions. And as I'll talk about in just a second, the Family and Medical Leave Act, our country's only national leave law, covers only about 56% of people due to limitations in the law. And so that means the vast majority of the workforce, and we saw this reflected, I think, in our polling questions, just lack some really basic protections when they need to take time away from work to care for themselves or their families, even though that's a situation that nearly everybody will face. Workers of color are particularly unlikely to be able to really access FMLA leave. And so the red bar here shows who is eligible for the FMLA, which means you work for a large enough employer, 50 or more employees, you have worked for that employer for at least a year, and you work at least 1,250 hours a year, which is a high bar often for people to meet if they took a year off to have a child, or if they're only able to work part-time because they have health or caregiving needs. And then when you combine that with the fact that FMLA provides only unpaid leave, very few people can afford to spend much time away from a job without a paycheck. And so that gray bar shows the share of each group of people who not only is eligible for and covered by FMLA, but also could actually take 12 weeks of leave without falling into real financial distress. And so you can sort of see that those rules, even though things like an eligibility rule around hours worked or employer size seems to be gender and race neutral on its face, because of the ways that our economy and our labor force have been shaped over time by racism, by sexism, by caregiving patterns, by immigration patterns, all of these things. Those seemingly neutral rules really affect different groups of people differently. Next slide. So without that policy base, with no national paid leave, with limitations in the FMLA, in addition to other factors that probably addressed earlier in this series, like lack of pay equity laws, lack of childcare, when the pandemic hit and suddenly all the childcare is closed and suddenly all of the schools went to remote schooling, and suddenly there was a really devastating virus spread in workplaces, that spread in any social setting. We had far too many people stuck with a really impossible choice between staying in their job and risking their health or risking the well-being of their families, their children, or leaving a job and losing that paycheck and losing that potential for career advancement in the future. So we see in this chart a huge drop in employment, but that it hit women particularly hard, and it especially hit Black and Latino women early on. And we also see toward the end of that chart that the recovery for women has been much slower than it has been for men. Now, there are two factors here. I mentioned the caregiving issue and the health issue, but we also see in this chart some impact of that occupational segregation I mentioned before. In some of the jobs that have been hit hardest by pandemic shutdowns, like retail, food service, hospitality, a lot of these are occupations in which women are disproportionately employed. And so you really had women being hit on multiple fronts. They're sort of in the industries that were most likely to shut down. At the same time, also overrepresented in industries like nursing that were most exposed to the pandemic, and at the same time, also still likely to be facing most of the family caregiving needs at home. And that's just a really impossible set of circumstances that many people have been living with and really struggling with this last year. And it's been quite devastating. You know, this is sort of a very neutral seeming chart, right? You can sort of put it into lines and numbers and make it look really clean on a slide. But the lived experience of people over this past year has just been frankly awful. Meanwhile, the recovery has been slow as the pandemic has continued to drag on. And so we really saw, you know, as we've been tracking everything in sort of public health and labor and the economy and sort of putting those pieces together over the past year, we found that there have been really disproportionate impacts at work on people of color. So this slide shows that by April of last year, Latinx, Black, and Asian American workers made up a really disproportionately large share of workers who were away from work due to having coronavirus symptoms. So these were who was getting sick early on in that first wave of the pandemic. Workers who were exposed to the virus but forced to go to work due to the lack of paid sick leave almost certainly contributed to greater spread of the virus at in-person workplaces. You know, we know that this happens every year in flu season, and it's, you know, certainly we've seen, you know, some horrible news stories about meatpacking plants and other places where people really don't have access to those basic benefits. And on sort of the flip side, we know that public policy can make a difference because in the month after Congress enacted emergency paid sick and family leave last year, that was actually shown to slow the spread of coronavirus early on. So we can sort of see that inkling of if we'd had a policy that covered everybody that lasted longer, imagine the difference it might have made. But sad to say, the lack of universal paid family and medical leave meant that workers with longer lasting illnesses, with disabilities, with child and family caregiving needs just didn't have much choice but to continue working at high cost to their health and their family's well-being, or to leave their jobs and face that financial disaster. So here on this slide, we see the pandemic really included intersecting health, caregiving, and economic crises that were particularly harsh for women of color in their communities. As a result, we unfortunately have seen that Black, Indigenous, and other people of color have died at higher rates than white people overall. These figures are adjusted for age because of the sort of particularly disproportionate impact of COVID on older people. But if you look sort of within age, adjust for age categories, we see this disproportionate impact. So the basic story here is that health and economics are completely connected, and particularly in terms of people's jobs. So when you have groups of people who are especially exposed to COVID at their essential jobs, who are the same people who have less access to paid time off, And then this gets compounded by what we call adverse social determinants of health. So this includes things like a lack of access to healthcare, medical discrimination among healthcare providers, also down to things like having cramped living conditions because housing is unaffordable. All of these things really contributed to the disproportionate spread of the coronavirus, and were areas where public policy could have made a difference, and it's sort of things that we should be thinking about as we think about sort of next steps in our economic recovery. So job protected paid leave for a number of these reasons then becomes doubly important for workers of color. You know, everybody needs it, but it's especially important for people who are most vulnerable, economically speaking. So as we mentioned, the pay gaps that we mentioned earlier are then often hitting the same people who have less access to paid leave. So then they have sort of fewer resources to deal with an unpaid leave. And at the same time, discrimination in the labor market means that these same folks are more likely to lose their jobs and may face greater hurdles to getting rehired and are often likely to return to a lower paid position. Yeah, so we saw this play out during the pandemic as well, where many employers were doing the right thing, shifting to telecommuting if they could, or letting people have more flexible leave time. But there's still that unfortunate core share of employers who are either not expanding policies, or maybe those policies are only on paper. And so we have a statistic there that 28% of Black workers who requested paid leave were denied, compared to just 9% of white workers. And so you sort of see that inequity play out. Even when you have a good policy on paper, is it being really implemented equitably for all workers? Next slide. So all of that is kind of the dismal reality of today, but the good news is we actually know how to solve this problem. We know that paid leave is a doable, workable policy, and that it does help gender and racial equity and economic security. We have a ton of data at this point that having access to paid leave means that women are more likely to stay in the workforce and earn higher wages over time. We know that having access to a gender equitable paid leave means that men become more involved caregivers in their families. And that's really key for gender equity. And I'll pause on that point just a second. There is a lot of evidence that millennial and younger dads really, really want to be equally involved in their families. This has been a tremendous culture change that's happened bit by bit over a couple of generations. And we're at the point now where men are ready, but they need the support. We need the policy that allows them to take equal time. And we need to couple that with culture change in our workplaces so that they don't feel a sense of stigma that there's something odd or undesirable about taking time off from work to take care of their families. And that is sort of the second half to getting gender equity, is sort of women having the opportunities to advance, but also men stepping up and doing more of the housework, more of the domestic work, more of the caregiving work, which sort of helps decrease the stigma overall, and helps get really tackle that lingering sense that somehow it means you're uncommitted at a job if you take time for your family. And so we need men to help tackle that as well. We see paid leave, and here I want to really emphasize that we're talking about paid family and medical leave, time to bond with a new child, time to care for your own health condition, and also time to care for any other family member who has a serious illness. And that comprehensive policy is really important for older workers who may have a spouse or may have a disability of their own to address. But leaving the workforce at 50 or 60 is pretty risky. That really takes a hit to your retirement savings and your economic security at the older end of a career. And so having a comprehensive paid family and medical leave policy will help older folks retain their jobs longer. We know that access to paid leave means families are less likely to experience poverty and other kind of financial distress, sort of lower food insecurity rates, lower poverty rates. These are great things for families. And as is dear to our hearts at the National Partnership, paid leave has just tremendous benefits for maternal, infant, and child health. Everything from reducing postpartum depression rates to improving infant birth weights and reducing preterm births. to even because of the reduction in stress, financial hardship leads to stress. We also actually see benefits to parental relationships and even, this is kind of a sad statistic, but even a reduction in rates of child head trauma. And sort of just having enough resources reduces the stress on a family at a really, really stressful and critical time, having that new infant around. So in addition to those individual and family and household benefits, we also know paid leave actually benefits businesses. And this is a point that we love to make at the National Partnership because people often assume that a policy that's good for workers must somehow be bad for businesses. But that's not true. So we know that paid leave reduces turnover. We know that it improves morale and productivity at workplaces. And it stands to reason. If you're not able to take time when you need it, that makes it hard to focus at work. You're worried about your family, you're worried about your health, you're trying to go back to work 3 weeks after giving birth. Like, nobody's at their best in that circumstance. So letting people have time when they need it means that they can focus better when they're back at work. And it also means that they're more likely to go back to that job rather than leave it, which then leaves the employer with all of the expense and hassle of trying to find somebody new. We know that actually turnover costs on average 1/5 of an employee's annual salary. So that's cost savings right there. We know that for particularly younger, but not exclusively younger employees, having access to paid leave is a really key benefit that helps attract talent. And we see some improvements to health costs. Here's one of the other bits of paid leave research I didn't mention. Paid leave actually reduces nursing home utilization for older people due to the help with family caregivers. So that's sort of cost savings to our health system, and that flows through to businesses because they often bear so much of that health insurance cost. And there's also, a PR bonus to be seen as leading on an issue like this that is so popular that people recognize is really important to families and really important to gender equity. Finally, I'll say a word about small businesses. We envision a public program that by sort of taking on some of the costs and sort of centralizing the costs of providing a basic paid leave benefit, we can make it really affordable for small employers. And this is what the state programs have done. And I'll say more about that in a second. Finally, we see some good macroeconomic benefits. More people in the workforce means more taxpayers, more people earning money, greater financial security during those moments of kind of medical emergencies or caregiving emergencies means that fewer families need to turn to the social safety net programs. And frankly, it's popular. Every time we poll people on paid leave, we get just these tremendously popular majorities. We saw that in our chat poll at the beginning of this. Everybody kind of gets it. So what are we going to do? We have seen a lot of advancement over the last several years in both the private and public sectors. We see more and more employers offering paid leave to their employees and more turning to really, more gender neutral policies. We used to see a lot of like maternity leave, but no paternity leave, or like, maybe 6 or 12 weeks for mom, but like 1 week for dad, and that's not cutting it. So we've seen more employers get better policies, more comprehensive policies. We've also seen states, and I think the next slide will deal with that. And then before we turn to the last couple of slides, I want to mention two things. This week is a really big, we have big things moving in this Congress. So actually tomorrow, the House Committee on Ways and Means is going to have a hearing on childcare and paid leave. So we'll make sure that the link gets out to that if anybody wants to watch a congressional hearing tomorrow, which is my kind of excitement. We also know that the Biden administration has been prioritizing paid family and medical leave as part of its families plan. And so there was actually a great news story out yesterday, kind of pre-leaking a little bit of the details of where that plan seems to be landing. So hopefully more to follow on that. Next slide. So 10 states have paid family and medical leave, which is really exciting. Also, I just want to point out Rhode Island is on there. Rhode Island is a very tiny state. If Rhode Island can do it, the country can do it. And in our tracking between 2015 and 21, more than 100 leading companies had adopted policies, and we'll share some information on that afterwards. But at the end of the day, we know that not every state is probably going to take this step on its own, so it's time for federal action. Next slide. Here is just an outline of some of the principles in paid leave. I mentioned that gender equity is really central for us. So that is why we want a comprehensive policy. It's not just paid leave for mom, it's paid leave for everybody. It needs to be sort of a meaningful amount of time. It needs to be sustainably funded. It needs to include all workers so that when you're moving from job to job or across the country, you still have your basic benefit. And it needs to be secure so that people don't lose their job for taking it. Next slide. And finally, a couple things to think about if you want to take action on this. Adopting or strengthening policies at your own employer can be really powerful and help make the case and help people. We've seen some leading businesses like Facebook and Microsoft actually try to push some change down their supply chain by requiring contractors to establish paid leave policies. If you have good stories from your employer, from your own experience, please share those. Get in touch with us. We're always getting requests for stories. Write a blog, write a letter to the editor. If your employer has had good experiences with paid leave, have them speak up. We're always looking for businesses to endorse paid leave principles and speak up about the business benefits. And also, as always, write your member of Congress, call your member of Congress and tell them that this is important to you. Last slide, and here's my contact info. Yes, it is on there. Always happy to answer questions, be in touch, and look forward to keeping the fight up. Thanks so much for joining.
Outstanding. Thank you, Jessica. This was really terrific for getting us going with lots and lots of good information. So I appreciate that. And we have time for a little bit of Q&A. So one of the questions said, family leave is usually discussed for employees. What about students in grad programs, for example, or law school or anything like that, that would also potentially benefit from this kind of leave?
Yeah, that's such a good question because this is one of the ways that people kind of fall through the cracks is even when employers offer policies, it's often for just the full-time people, just the permanent staff. And right. So when you're on those contracts or you're sort of a irregular, part-time, seasonal, all of those things, what we envision in a national policy would be a national system, a little bit like Social Security that covers everybody. Everybody would pay in through a modest payroll tax, and that would create a national fund that then would pay out a benefit directly to people when they take that leave. So number one, that's a good kind of smooth way to cover everybody. So just like Social Security, you would be kind of tracked from job to job. If you had multiple jobs, they would all count. And it would include small, if you're running your own business, you'd also be covered. And the other flip side benefit of that is then for smaller employers, they no longer have to foot the total bill when someone takes leave. And so they can use that cost savings to pay overtime or hire somebody new. So for someone like a grad student, you would be paying into that system, so you'd be covered, even if your leave was, after the semester was over or something like that.
Right, and I think for people to understand that some about the states that have passed this, how this really benefits small businesses, and small businesses are really in favor of this, right? We have this vision of, if restaurant X has to pay maternity leave, paternity, parental, whatever it is, leave for somebody for 12 weeks, that is going to devastate that restaurant, that shop, that whatever it is. And the point is that if there's a federal policy like this, that wouldn't be economically devastating to that business.
Exactly. If the federal program can kind of chip in for that benefit, and then all you have to do as a small business owner is, hold that position for a couple of weeks, which is, in a way a benefit because it's hard to find new people. So if you can, manage to, satisfy someone's leave need, give them the time that they need, then they're able to come back and be focused on their jobs.
Right, terrific. Good, and I am looking, there was another quick question, and I'll just grab one more here. What about, does bereavement sometimes get covered in leave policies and what you've seen? And as this person writes poignantly, we get weeks to bond with our child when they arrive. Bereavement is something like 3 days. And if you lose a child, you need longer than that. And I'm wondering what you've seen on the national landscape for that.
Yeah, it's such a good question, and if this is hitting anybody personally, I'm so sorry.
Right.
Yeah, it's something that is not explicitly addressed in laws like the Family Medical Leave Act. So in some circumstances, it may be related to a medical leave. So for example, if someone has a miscarriage, that would be covered as a medical leave. Yeah, bereavement alone currently has not been. And so that certainly is something that has come up a lot and that we've talked a lot about.
All right, thanks for that, Jessica. That's terrific. All right, well, with that, and we will have Jessica around for our Q&A at the end as well. But let me go ahead and bring on Janet Lucas-Taylor, who will be the perfect follow-on to Jessica with more specific details about how companies meet the challenges that Jessica's outlined and how these policies can benefit all. Janet is the Senior Director of Employee Benefits for Northwestern Mutual. Prior to joining Northwestern Mutual, she served as an employee benefits consultant, servicing large national employers in the areas of healthcare, wellness, employee engagement, and experience. Janet lives in Mequon with her husband Stephen, daughter Petra, and the dog Masha, which I love. And I am duly noting that we might need to turn on video and bring Janet back with us. So Janet, I'm hoping video is working and you can come back on and take us through.
Great, thank you, Andrea, and good afternoon, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time talking with you this afternoon about employee leave management, kind of best practices around that, and then share with you a couple examples of how employee benefits can complement your leave practices and create a more inclusive work environment and a better employee experience. Next slide, please. So just to level set the employee leaves landscape, what we're talking about in this area are really bucketed into three primary areas. First being entitlements, so things like FMLA and things that employers don't have a lot of control over, however, do need to monitor and manage for their employee population. The second bucket is insured or administrative type benefits, primarily related to medical leaves, things like workman's comp and short-term disability. And then lastly is a very broad bucket of employer-specific policies, procedures, and leave practices that fall in a wide variety of categories, and some of which we can really influence how our employees perceive our organization, how competitive we are in the market within these practices. Next slide, please. So when we think about leave competitiveness at Northwestern Mutual, we again really try to address these categories in very specific ways. For entitlements, we have an ongoing partnership with our legal team just to ensure ongoing compliance with all state, federal, local guidelines and laws. For our insured and administered groups, we do benchmarking every 2 years on our benefit provisions to make sure that they're competitive in the marketplace and nothing has changed significantly in the market. Northwestern Mutual does manage their leaves internally. So about every 5 years, we look very closely and assess our administration policies and procedures to really look for efficiencies and best practices to manage leaves for our employees, our business, and bring individuals back to work. And lastly, in the employer-specific categories, we again benchmark every 2 years. And annually, we really try to look at market trends, targeting leave categories that we feel can impact employee engagement, retention, and the overall competitiveness of our benefits. Two that we'll focus on as we, later, our caregiver leave and parental leave. Next slide, please. So at Northwestern Mutual, when we're considering making changes to our leave policies and practices, we have several things that we consider. First is the law, making sure that anything that we would implement or change would be compliant with all state and federal requirements. The second area I like to think of as equity. So really trying to look at, can that change be supported across all types of our employees, our union employees, our non-exempt employees, as well as our exempt populations, to make sure that that change doesn't negatively impact one group over another. Thirdly, just looking at our infrastructure and the administration of that benefit and setting it up for success. Is this something that managers can easily and accurately support? Can employees access the benefit and the leave policy? Is it clear and easy for them to understand? We also like to look at both our current vendor landscape and new vendors in the market and resources that might help support employees and their families in engaging with the new policy and supporting a way to maximize benefits and leaves together to really allow employees to use that appropriately or not have to take leave at all to as part of their work life. Like most employers, we do have a cost benefit analysis that we need to consider. So looking at the costs of the new policy or practice, and then what investments are really offset by improvements in engagement and retention and productivity of employees. And lastly, COVID-19 is sort of a special circumstance. So we allowed leave for individuals to get vaccinated and to deal with side effects from the vaccination. So they didn't have to take paid time off and just really looking at leave practices that remove obstacles. We'll talk about two areas. The first is paid parental leave. You can see from the benchmarking slides, Northwestern Mutual benchmarks very similarly to many organizations. About 67% offer a paid paternal leave benefit that is consistent across maternity, paternity, and adoption benefits. And then kind of on the right-hand side of the screen, we're also going to talk about caregiver leave. So we offer 2 weeks of paid caregiver leave, which is an outlier in the employer market. 65% of companies are still not offering a caregiver leave practice. Next slide, please. So Northwestern Mutual has had paid parental leave in place for a number of years. So as a benefits team, we really wanted to focus on how we could broaden that benefit and family planning and contribute to more employee engagement and higher satisfaction. Oftentimes we look at claims. Pregnancy, labor and delivery, and newborns represent about 9% of our total medical spend. And then Northwestern Mutual also has a very high commitment to diversity and inclusion. So we really felt as a team that we could broaden this benefit to include family planning more broadly and really hit on and support our employees in a new way. So in 2021, we implemented a new surrogacy benefit tied to our adoption benefits. So just extending that benefit for adoption to surrogacy as well at those same levels. And then implemented 2 new vendors to focus on family planning and support our families. Ovia, who focuses on fertility and pregnancy and early parenting support, and Progeny, who's really more focused on medical aspects like in vitro, connecting people to centers of excellence and ensuring that we're doing all the best practices to have the best outcomes to allow parents when they're taking that time off to use it for bonding and not having medical issues as well. Next slide, please. So caregiver leave is really an emerging leave practice. It really hit the market about 5 years ago. And research is showing that caregiving employees spend about 32 hours a week. doing various tasks for the individual they're caregiving for, whether that's paying bills, driving to appointments, etc. And this is having big impacts on those employees who are providing caregiving. So they're using their personal time off to do that. There's added stress and mental health issues. You heard as well from Jessica that some people are having to exit the job market to provide caregiving, or just sidelining their career while they're performing these services. Next slide, please. So we really wanted to look at a solution that not only provided time off, but supported employees and their families to actually stay in their job and perform well. So we scoured the market and selected Wealthy as our care coordination vendor. That company really works with our employees to do a myriad of tasks, anything from scheduling appointments, helping them find care facilities, etc. They also provide an easy and convenient way to tie multiple family members into the same kind of care plan. So there's less communication that needs to occur on an ongoing basis. And then we paired that with caregiver time off. So all eligible employees at Northwestern Mutual have 2 weeks of paid leave a year to perform caregiving activities. And then as we were looking at that, we thought we should probably look at short-term disability to make sure that policy is aligned and there's no conflict. So we updated our short-term disability to have the first 2 weeks paid at 100% for our employees. We implemented this about 1.5 years ago, and over 700 employees have engaged with Wealthy, and it really is one of the most appreciated benefits at Northwestern Mutual, and has really, I think, helped our families tremendously over that time. So with that, I'm going to thank you and turn it back over to Andrea.
Excellent. Well, let me remind everybody that you can please put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. And we're going to go ahead and bring all three of us back on the screen for a little bit of a conversation now that we can see each other and be together, and happily answer some questions. And I'm going to go ahead and take prerogative as I take a look at the questions coming in. Janet, it's wonderful to see Northwestern Mutual really lead with innovation and wonderful benefits, which I don't hope I'm going to need, but it's great to know that as the spouse of a Northwestern Mutual, that those are there. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, or Jessica, from yours, when you have, leading corporate, what's the importance of corporations leading in this way? I mean, on the one hand, I look at where we are with part-time workers in small businesses that get, that don't even get paid anything leave. And here we have Northwestern Mutual at the other end, really providing a panoply of terrific support. Does it help that we have these corporate leaders setting the stage? Does that trickle down in some way? Does that move the national conversation?
I think it does. I think that the more employees or employers that implement practices, they then become best practice, and then the resources and are made available to smaller employers as well. I think it provides a lot of data and is extremely important for all employers to consider.
Jessica, what have you seen? And I'll ask, one of the questions coming in is, if you see Northwestern Mutual and you go, well, holy schmoly, this is amazing. How do we get everybody else to get on board?
Yeah, so I would say leading employer policies do a couple of things in the public policy universe. First, just showing what's possible. Sometimes giving us something to aim for and giving that evidence base for, like, hey, we can do this and it has this beneficial effect on the business, on the employees. And sometimes showing some of the more maybe nervous members of Congress that like, hey, you can do this without totally destroying a business. It actually has these benefits. That can be really powerful. At the same time, we also have seen some businesses and some leading private sector leaders speaking up for public policy as well. There's the benefit that accrues to a lot of businesses by kind of raising the floor of your customer base. Like when they have when your neighbors have more money in their pockets to spend, that's good for your local businesses. So there's that kind of basic thing as well. At the same time, I think we always expect that what we envision for public policy is to really set a strong floor, a strong foundation that everybody can stand on. But at the same time, always expect there to be leading employers who are going above and beyond. And so there's always that kind of room for growth, room for experimentation, room to still be competitive with your benefits package.
Well, good.
Can I add to that? I just want to say, I also think that, smaller employers should leverage their local resources and reach out to their employer counterparts. None of these benefits that I talked about today from the support resource standpoint are actually cost prohibitive. So they are manageable for all. There's readily available benchmarking and community groups. So I think we can, think about the art of the possible and not, come into it with the blinding, oh, we could never do that, what NM is doing.
Right. And have we seen, well, I guess two things. So let me think of one thing, and then I'll pick up the question that's that is coming in here. I mean, when, and Janet, you've come to NM more recently. I mean, what was persuasive to other companies that you've worked with to get them to change their benefits, to actually upgrade them, right? We have a lot of people listening in. If they were to go either through their ERG, VRG, whoever, or to go to HR and to say, like, here's what you should do. What have been those persuasive levers that get companies to improve their leave policies?
You know what? I think certainly there's the claims aspect to it. I mean, medical spend and leave spend is a tremendous amount of an employer's budget, but also there is a recognition among leaders within employers that the success of your organization hinges on the success of your employees, right? So one follows the other. So having these policies that really support people being actively engaged in the workplace means better outcomes.
Great. All right, there's Janet, Jessica, this goes back to the broader policies that would support the kind of, as you said, the Social Security aspects of this. And we have a question saying, have you conducted surveys? Do employers, and I would guess employees, have the appetite, the willingness to pay this kind of tax in order to provide leave policies?
Yeah, we've seen pretty positive results, both when we've surveyed, and most of our surveys have focused on small and medium-sized employers, sort of prospectively, like, would you like such a policy? And retrospectively, in states where these policies have been put into place, they have been overall one majority support of employers in the state. There was actually just a great study out last week showing this in New York, which expanded its paid family leave program starting in 2018, I think. There were, they sort of did a series of surveys sort of before and after the implementation of the program, and found that actually having the state program helped a lot of employers manage absences. Because, as we've been speaking about, I think many of them may not have been able to afford their own leave policy prior to having the kind of state nudge the policy along. And so we've by and large seen pretty positive results, or I often say positive and neutral results, because this is often the story, is that there is sometimes a little bit of a, like, the sky is falling ahead of the passage of some of these programs, and then after the fact it turns out to be not that big a deal. Particularly for smaller employers, they may not even have someone every year who uses the leave program, but when it's there, it then becomes a resource for them.
Okay, so well, and I think that's a great place for us to wrap up, to really think about, how information, how evidence, how research can provide support, so that at both sides, whether we're looking at statewide and what we hope will be federal policies to provide that floor, as you know, that foundation to help us as a country move forward, with then progressive companies like Northwestern Mutual leading the charge and really providing that high end, and setting a goal for everybody else of, look what we can accomplish. I mean, Janet, even seeing those numbers of 700 people accessing that service in the last year and a half. I mean, holy cow, that is persuasive that this is what employees need and want. And frankly, for anybody listening in who's at another company going like, I would like that benefit. That sounds amazing. And that itself then moves the conversation forward. So to both of you, I really want to thank you so much for joining us today and helping us have this conversation about what we want for our companies and for our state and for our city in Milwaukee. We really appreciate both the two of you and all of the community support we have had this spring with having these conversations. We look forward next fall to continuing our conversation on equity. We will be in touch with everybody that we have on our mailing list for speaker plans and conference plans. Please reach out to us at IWL@marquette.edu if you're interested in getting on our mailing list, finding out more information, anything else that we can provide you. Feel free to follow us on social media, more events, more information, and per usual, Zoom will send you a follow-up of this session where you can register your information with us and let us know that you are interested. And with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Enjoy what I hope will get warmer weather at some point soon. Be well, have a great summer, and we will see you when we all get together in the fall. Thanks so much.